So I'm very passionate about living roofs, sustainable urbanism and landscape architecture and architecture. My interest originally started in London when I was working for the Environment Agency as a major projects officer, with a role of promoting sustainable development for large-scale developments on the southern side of the River Thames. I think, as everyone knows, that there is a bit of a growing interest around the world because of intensification of our cities, and that living roofs help us adapt to the effects of climate change, provide a habitat for wildlife, alleviate flash flooding, reduce diffuse stormwater pollution, and enhance biodiversity. They provide public and resident amenity space, reduce the effects of the urban heat island effect over a large scale, and also reduce energy consumption. So awareness of these issues can be seen in lots of works by Professor Wheeler, Professor Manfred Koa, and architect Emilio Ambes. The urbanisation of our world and the intensification of our cities is pretty obvious to all of us. 3% of our population lived in cities around the 1800s, 50% of our population around 2010, and it's projected that 70% of our population will be living in cities by 2050. With this growing precedence of living roofs being promoted worldwide because of their multifunctional benefits, it's interesting to see that this is only really to do with significant economic benefits which reduce heating and cooling bills by reducing energy expenditure and insulating the building, protecting the roof membrane from UV and weather damage, and extending the roof life by 2 or 3 times. They provide suitable environmental mitigation, especially with planning consents, and as such can speed up the planning process. They also add to the property value by effectively giving you another area of marketable floor space. And they reduce water storage requirements and drainage infrastructure on the site, so you can actually put the living roof on and reduce your need for capacity under the building. So in effect, they can save money, reuse materials on the site for substrate, and lots of other benefits. So since returning to New Zealand in 2008, there has been obvious not only interest in green infrastructure, but also the manifestation of green-driven infrastructure in New Zealand, such as Andrew Patterson's Geyser building in Parnell, and also the Tuhoe building by Jasmines. This interest in green accreditation has not necessarily led to the inclusion of living roofs in developments, albeit the only system that can be included on a building to gain a number of points across so many credits of Green Star. Many living roofs in New Zealand are a result of a client's desires and are purely aesthetically driven. This is the case with the NZI building by Jasmax and Waitakere Council's building by Architectus. Living roofs are landscapes, not just additions to buildings to provide greenwash. They are living systems that require forethought, planning, and integration with the existing landscape. Living roof urbanism is the consideration of relationships that can exist between living roofs, the urban environment, and the urban environment, environmentally, socially, and economically. So my investigation is comprised of 2 distinct components. So firstly, the investigation of the existing situation locally and internationally in terms of practice and theory, which I've done, and the second component involves speculation and determination to produce strategies. So whilst there are exemplars worldwide of urbanistic living roofs, there are a number of obstacles that need to be appreciated in order to devise strategies for progressing living roof urbanism. The Auckland Council Draft Master Plan was aspirational in this regard and did mention living roofs. Unfortunately, the Auckland Unitary Plan does not in any significant parts. Regardless of policy requirements or incentives though, my concern is that focusing on the requirement to incorporate living roofs in a development will not consider the multitude of benefits these new landscapes can offer our urban environment and society. Currently, most of the living roofs that have been designed, especially in New Zealand, do not consider the roof space as an extension to the landscape, society, or the urban environment, but as a separate system with localised benefits. The design of and incorporation of living roofs into our landscape has not been successfully achieved worldwide either. There is a disconnect emerging where living roofs are being tacked onto buildings without consideration for the local environment, and as a result, all the benefits not being realised. This was evident in my European trip, where a number of case studies were actually visited and assessed. And with regard to the disconnect between architectural and green roof practice, a number of problems or failings have been noted. I've visited a number of exotic living roofs which may have the potential to actually be considered a biosecurity risk. Planted with exotics not appropriate for the landscape, especially lots within Auckland. Access and outlook are really considered as well in the design phase, and the potential to enhance biodiversity and our natural landscape is not always contemplated. This is evident in the number of structurally lightweight, exotic, inaccessible living roofs being established, with the potential for connected, biodiverse, well-designed spaces being lost. So my research questions are currently, how can living roofs be approached urbanistically? How can living roofs be part of the landscape? And how to structure development and cities where living roofs are part of the city and systems of the city. These are being revisited following my key findings so far, but my expectation is that a development of a living roof urbanism design practice will be an enabler for future living roof developments that will enhance our cityscapes and urban systems. This design practice will include acknowledged benefits and extend to incorporate the living and non-living relationships that can enhance living urbanism. Currently, most living roof designs do not consider the roof space as an extension to the landscape. So this disconnect is evident in my consultancy work and needs to be acknowledged. My aim is to establish a set of realms or a design tool to help better integrate these systems into our landscapes to achieve maximum benefits. This is my specific site, which I'm sure you're well aware of. Auckland's waterfront is steeped in history and the birthplace of Auckland. The area has a history of trade, industry and fishing. This site here will house a new 4.5 hectare urban park, and my intention is to apply my design practice of living roof urbanism on this site, being Auckland's largest urban revitalisation project. Since my first workshop, I've actually narrowed down my site to just the Headland Park, and the last stage of Wynyard Quarter development includes the Headland Park development, so it works nicely with timing. This area will house an anticipated mixed use of office, retail and commercial alongside the marine industry on the western boundary. Living roof urbanism practice will be used to design a living roof development across this portion, and this project has potential to stimulate holistic living roof development in the waterfront, and as such it would be a fantastic opportunity to test the practice. My intention is to utilise the existing density of the unitary plan and their existing design to add living roofs, evaluate how living roof urbanism can affect the landscape, the city and the systems. So these are the indicative perspectives that have been put forward as an appendix in the unitary plan. Non-statutory, but this design has actually informed the district plan density and controls. And this is a typical street section. So what those planning regulations and the urban design report has actually meant in terms of what the street sections will look like along the New Headland Point. So this is my proposed headland development so far. and how I've got here. It's been a bit of a process in learning how to 3D model and learn how to use SolidWorks. So how did I get here? Well, I've actually reviewed existing technical research which details the benefits of living roofs over the past couple of years. I've reviewed all of the existing living roof policies pretty much worldwide, incentive toolkits and models. And I was also lucky enough to attend the Living Roof conference in Copenhagen, where I assessed a number of case studies from Spain all the way up to Denmark. And my long-term objectives are to expand on these and to detail how living roofs can be designed urbanistically and how we can structure this development. So in order to examine these problems, I've been researching on a number of fronts. One of which was actually interviews with architects to interpret how green roof consultancy intersects with both their own practice and around the world, and with other disciplines like architecture, landscape engineering to create living roofs. So from interviewing people like Ivan Mercer and Craig Moller, a number of other people, I kind of came up with a couple of key findings. From talking to all of the architects, one thing was clear, that a lot of them hadn't actually designed living roofs. They'd left that to landscape architects and they had been tacked on at the end. A lot of clients, they thought, were not interested in long-term benefits, only short-term benefits. Clients were not interested in investing in this type of system. And most architectural consultants actually thought that the incorporation of living roofs has and probably always will be just limited to aesthetic benefits. So now I've extended these conversations to urban designers, planners, ecologists and engineers. So from my overseas case study visits and architectural discussions, I've reviewed when they happen, why they happen and where they happen. And the key findings from this research display a strong tendency towards anthropocentric and economically motivated developments, with points to note including that the topography clustering was mainly commercial, recreational and community. And there was mainly and all but one site visited had access. There was a mix of lower cost access methods, which were most commonly included natural slope, ramps and steps. And vegetation was usually mixed. Only 2 sites I visited were purely native. So I've also reviewed the existing policy documents, site constraints and densities proposed in the plan. And that's actually been set as a constraint for my design, so I can, at a bare minimum, meet that same density or actually extend it, whilst also keeping the 4.5 hectares or more. And here are some iterations that I explored, which informed some of the modelling. I just started with obvious blocks, ramps, stairs, and I also designed a bespoke triangular shaped building that does sit on just the area nominated in the district plan for development. But I did create further options as light into buildings did need further consideration, and I was also want to say I'm quite aware that I am positioning myself between architecture and landscape architecture. It's scary. And I had been using the proposed footprint as a base, but then I did move to exploring the whole headland, thus being constrained by the objectives and policies of the site and location, rather than 2 triangular building footprints which have emerged just from the urban design framework document and ended up in our planning documents. So after working with all my printed building blocks, I moved back to sketching to see how I could include ramp stairs and how that would work with depending on the building size and location. I explored cut-ins to those buildings and access to light, and I also started investigating ground plane treatments and integration with Wynyard Wharf alongside other green infrastructure techniques like green walls, the only external green walls. And this is now informing the road use or hierarchy that has been put forward in the plan, as the end of Daldy Street could actually be pedestrian only and not restrict any traffic movements and form a new open space or green space. So where to from here? From here I'll be looking, doing some further detailed design of the Hedon Park living roof development. Using the urbanism practice with my model, I will be looking into the development of my practice and revisiting my research questions, evaluating living roof urbanism practice and specific Wynyard Quarter development, its implications for the redevelopment of Wynyard Quarter and its systems. And I'll have an evaluation phase to reflect on the design outcome and the investigation as a whole. It's anticipated that the final phase will define what I've learnt so far, and it is my intention that this may include a comparative and contrast component to consider living roof urbanism in the light of its existing methodologies to show how it fits within the discipline of landscape architecture.
Zoe? Questions, please?
I'll start because I know nothing about the technical side of this at all, so apologies if I put my foot in it. I mean, it always has seemed to me this curious thing about green roofs. In one sense, you can't see them if you're just walking along, through the city. They're up there, but you don't know about them. So they're invisible. And the other thing which is sort of contradictory in my head anyway, that as an architect, they seem curiously to want to either deny architecture or to suggest that the definitions of architecture are far too rigid, which is a more interesting thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that. The project seems to suggest that architecture, which is architecture landscape as one kind of category, refuses lightness. It's really only concerned with the monolithic and the weighty. It's the way it looks. It's the ground lifted up. We inhabit the ground. So the potential of the tent and the light forms becomes annihilated as a group, a category of architecture. So all that interests me in a sort of random way. But I have to say that you've done a huge amount of careful work. It's just obvious you've done a great deal of critical analysis of it and looked at lots of examples, and that's all terrific, and you stated the problems clearly. I guess the only thing I really can say is that it's another thing that's always occurred to me is that the desire to put a park by the sea seems really perverse, because things don't grow by the sea. The salt winds come in.
Sorry.
Right, well, maybe they do. The things they try and put there, so that led to the question of what constitutes your palette, like mosses and lichens and mould and...
David, please.
That would be nice if that were the case.
May not be disagreeing. So I think you make some really good points, which is this. So I call it, there's no doubt that Zoe, you've done a whole pile of incredible research, and obviously are really well versed, better than me, on any of this green roof thing. But I deliberately used the word green roof thing then to be slightly provocative, because I'm wondering whether it doesn't sometimes verge on the point of evangelistic positioning of everything's wrong except we need green roofs to solve the world. And I fundamentally don't believe that, and I fundamentally don't believe some of those things that are on the wall up there either, that the city's a desert and void of I don't walk through the city and see these things, and I don't see the city like that, and I see that so it's not to say that we don't need green roofs. I think they're really interesting, but I do think it's really interesting and not the saviour of urbanism. So there is this positioning, I think, of saying, okay, I've got this problem, and I'm all consumed by it, and that's great because the amount of enthusiasm is great, but it needs to be positioned with the rest of the other things, and then you go to yourself, okay, now I'm out there. Now, where would be the right space to do it? Why? Is it that actually we could put a headland park on the end, and actually there's a thumping great big building underneath it. No one knew the building was there, and we get a double whammy. We get 4 point whatever hectares of that and 4 point hectares of GFA sitting underneath there, sometime under the water, or some crazy building sitting under there, and we've doubled it, and it's something different. And but our wharves, which are really important, for me, I really have done quite a bit of thinking around wharves, and maybe they're the place not to put the green roof. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, just putting it out there. There's a wharf. It's got a respect. It's got a history. It's got a heritage, and therefore we can have lightweight buildings, and we can have a lightweight roof, and that's cool because it's contrasted over there with something else. So it's about saying that these are a number of things being played out in the city, and one of the things that we see fall over because they're really good ideas is things that become so narrow that everybody goes, oh, that's in the realm of craziness, and therefore it never happens. So in my time, from my years and years ago in education, I've seen that happen time and time again. Really great things being fallen over because the story being told was out there, but the idea was good, just told the wrong way, and get it through. So I think you've got to bear that in mind. And having played, so I just take another thing, having played in the space between architecture and landscape architecture a lot, so perhaps that's where I, myself personally, and perhaps our practice sort of verges in there. We've had to own up to that issue, and now we're architects as well. So we've had to say, right, shit, that's enough. We're out of our jurisdiction. We need to be able to do this seriously, and to do this, we are not architects. So we can now say we're architects and put our hands up and say we're a registered practice, and we have real McCoy as directors on our board. So I think while you're happy to play, I think you should play in the game for sure, right? But if you play in the game, I think, from my experience, you need to know that really well. So that's probably an obvious statement. What do I mean? I mean, you need to be able to talk about a building the same way as an architect would talk about a building. So when you were talking about them, you didn't say what the building was, what the GFA was, what the use of that building was, where the front door was. It was all about the roof. Well, the roof's only a tiny piece of that building. So if we're going to play in that space, which I challenge you to do, and that's the way to talk to the architects, talk to them in their own language, and you'll get a lot further rather than an us and them thing. And some of the best practices in the world do that really well, and which is what we're modelling off. And when you break those borders and boundaries down, you need to be able to speak that language. So I would say play in the field. You don't have to be the architect; that's someone else to do that. But you've got to be able to speak the language, and therefore you've got to know how they work, how they function. So you've got to learn all the landscape stuff, and now you've got to go and learn all the architecture stuff, and that's doable at the level that you need to do it. But you've got to do it, and then you'll be able to argue your point super convincingly. I don't know if that helps, but we got a lot of issues.
Okay, so architect, landscape architect, urban designer.
Okay. I think that's a really good idea, actually, having a building underneath Headland Park. It was just a stroke of genius that sort of popped out there. I almost wonder if you're taking on too much. I mean, I think you've done a lot of research, and I definitely wouldn't argue with that, but when you said that you were narrowing it down to Headland Park, and then you showed us the whole of the wharf again, and that you've done a model over the whole of the wharf, it's a huge area that you're dealing with, and I don't know, for me it just felt that you're, and the illustrations that you gave us, and maybe that is just the photographs, but they're all quite discrete buildings, and I don't know, the various photos that you were showing us were pretty much all discrete buildings. I don't know what else you've looked at, because you didn't obviously have done a lot of research, but that's a big ask, taking on that amount of space, and maybe it would be better just to narrow it down to a small area that becomes then a green lung. I mean, we have a lot of green lungs. I think of parks and street trees as green lungs in an urban environment, and that's part of that. It isn't a desert. There's a lot of urban ecology going on in all of our cities, and that can be part of that biodiversity as well. But it's got to be somewhere that, as you say, is accessible. And I liked the idea of your ramps and being able to get up there and use it. But I mean, perhaps it is then part of a public space that is obviously part of a public space.
Sorry, if I can interrupt. Do you think Zoe's sort of challenging traditional models of urbanism? The kind of this new urbanist model that we have, there's buildings, there's streets, there's parks, and she's sort of trying to mix.
I think you can mix. No, I think you can mix it, and I think the Lincoln Centre, for example, has done that very successfully, and I think that would be a really good example for you. And you could do that in somewhere that is a civic space that exists, and actually pick that up, or you could do it if you're working very solidly with a team that encompasses all of those facets. But I kind of feel that for this project, it actually seems like you've taken on more than you can, or you've bitten off more than you can chew for that sort of area of land. That's just to me anyway. So, my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. I mean, thanks for the presentation, which is really, really interesting. I think one of the things I was going to say, again, cover my clothes, I can say I concur with them. No. One of the critiques, I suppose, about green roofs, and I think this point you're trying to bring out here, is the multi-use of the space to ensure that and I think that's why in New Zealand you just predominantly do see these sort of desert on top of the roof, because of the maintenance and long run costs of looking after the space. And I think the idea, for me, if we are going to engage in this, we've got to make sure they are multi-usable spaces. They're either communal outdoor spaces for people inside the buildings, or we're bringing people into them. And I think that's a really interesting idea. I also like the idea that you got rid of the idea of having a park at the end of the. I'm not a big fan of that personally. You've certainly done a lot of research. It would have been really interesting from my perspective to see how that translates again to the New Zealand perspective of what has happened in New Zealand, because my understanding is quite limited, and it is limited to that sort of very much sort of cactus, stone type thing because of the maintenance costs. So it would be good to see that, and also a bit more exploration about how you would actually go about doing that in that type of space. Mm-hmm. But I do agree with my colleagues about it's definitely not I don't see the city as a desert. I certainly don't see it that way at all. But I'm interested.
I didn't say I see the city as a desert. I just think that as designers and as how we all work together, we could be getting a lot more public space and a lot more green space from our cities.
I think that's what you're trying to say here.
And that's what I'm trying to say is that connectivity. If I go to Queen Street, I don't feel part of that city. I feel like I'm in a canyon at some points when I get to a narrow little street, and it does have a certain amount of biodiversity. I won't argue with that, but we can go so much further. If you go to Copenhagen or New York or London now. London, I think in 2 years, they had 20 hectares approved by way of planning permission. And to see those developments coming forward, which weren't kind of the densities that we're looking at here, but on Greenwich Peninsula, including, we had tidal terracing along all of the Thames Park, but that didn't just translate to green walls, which aren't probably that sustainable anyway. We actually got them onto ramps so people could then experience an eco park, but also see a bit further afield, wander up a ramp, and then get on top of a publicly accessible building and have a coffee. And for me, experiencing cities in that regard is a hell of a lot nicer than experiencing parts of downtown Auckland.
I mean, that goes on to the last point I was going to raise, is you talked about some of your rationales for this was planning permissions and it's easier to get. My experience of resource consent, it's actually harder to get these types of things through the resource consent process, and I think you touched on that with the unitary plan, it doesn't make any provisions for this type of stuff, does it?
No, it does actually now say that living rooms are permeable, can be considered permeable. So that kind of is a bit flawed as well, because depending on what type of roof you have, it depends on the permeability.
What I was trying to lead to is there an opportunity for you to engage in that discussion with those guys to try and get this sort of stuff put into the plan so it does become easier to deliver?
Yeah, I've been running the Living Rooms New Zealand organisation since I came back from London, and I'm a director of Green Rooms Australasia, so we do quite a lot of work with councils, but engaging with the Ludo Campbell Reid is quite easy in one regard, but actually sitting down to help inform policy
Someone like
is
Penny Pruitt might be a little bit more difficult to deal with, I imagine.
yeah, just a bit. But in terms of resource consents, if I have living rooms on projects, I always find the consenting process a little bit easier to get through. Yeah, that's just my experience.
Yeah, so this is quite a way out of my area. So I'm not sure how much I had to add. My thinking was pretty much around what Lee was just talking about. I mean, it makes sense. What you put forward is really compelling. There's clear benefits. It's very, very easy to see what some of those benefits are. And if it's not in the unitary plan, do you have any idea why it's not? It just didn't make.
Sorry, why?
Do you have any idea why they're sort of not provided for or within the unitary plan, given it's going to be guiding development in the city in the region for the next 30 years?
I don't know why. In terms of a spatial plan, there's lots of areas. I mean, we don't require energy, production of energy on site for every new building going up. Like spatial plans that I work with, the London plan, for instance, any new building over a certain density had to provide 40% of their power on site. You ended up pushing this kind of development, whereas, unitary plan is just emerging of all the district plans, in my opinion, just increasing densities. And unfortunately, the urban design stuff is just tacked on as well, and that doesn't have any.
Can you tell me what urbanistically means as well, please?
So I guess just I actually did print it off because I thought someone might ask that. It just means in terms of urbanism, so doing something with regard to urbanism or in an urbanistic way. I should have a better definition.
So, can I say more? Yeah. So perhaps hearing all the answers, perhaps the one issue might be that you just need to draw more. You need to draw what you say.
Do this more. I know. I need more.
Because what you're saying about go on the roof and have a coffee and walk up a ramp and do and explore this and see this, that I buy. Like that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, now that's the design.
That's the thing.
We need to see that stuff that you're saying, and we probably don't need half the first half. And you could do cut half the first of the talk out and put that into design and draw your drawings are great. Your little hand drawings. So do that and explore what they would be to say these are ideas that could be added or not added, integrated into the architecture, and and start that dialogue with that from the street, the water edge of the street, and you could break it up into an urban structure, couldn't you, to do it or whatever, however you want to do it. And then I think you'd start to say, then be starting to say things that we're hearing you talk about. It's not just about a green roof; it's about people being part of it, and I buy that argument. That extinguishes a whole lot of my argument just for that one statement that you gave back. So, yeah, I think in a nutshell that might be one of the key things. And then, so I'll put that over there. And then over there, the other thing is that actually, as part of this thing about going and doing different things, there's nothing that I know of in the unitary plan that would stop you from doing any of this. So I don't understand the debate about why it's missing. Well, is it missing because it's not mentioned and it should be incentivised? That's one debate. But there's nothing in the unitary plan that would say, hey, you can't have a green roof, So it might not be incentivised, and the power thing was a separate one, so I'm just talking about a green roof. So I think it's really easy for us to put barriers up so we can't do something for some reason. Well, you can do that. There's no reason. The biggest thing that I know about that makes it difficult, which would have to be conquered, is not getting a resource consent, because I'd agree, I think it'd be easy to get resource consent over an urban development with green roof. The hardest one getting a building consent, because you've got to waterproof the top of that building, the hell out of it. And you've also got to sell the maintenance, and if you've got an apartment building, there's people there all going to have to share in the maintenance and all the rest of it. And yes, you'll find people who'll be interested in it, but that'll be the hardest part to get through, rather than perhaps even the technicalities.
They're actually not dealt with in our building rules yet, or regulations, so you don't actually need a building consent to put up a green room.
Right.
Hence, when you'd quarter it, even on the container, council were trying to hold that one up, but there's absolutely nothing to push that one through.
Right.
So as long as it's watertight and you flood test it, it doesn't need a
I think
building.
we need to kind of wrap this one out. It's a great
Okay.
conversation, right? I just want Sarah to say one thing.
I was very interested in the idea that you said that this was not just isolated building roofs, but that it was part of a sort of continuous surface. So that in effect you've got a new landscape surface, which is this landscape architecture category, it's a new category. And then it intersects with the existing landscape. So Auckland is a field of volcanoes. What is the status of this other landscape that comes in and fills in around the volcanoes and wanders off? You know, a sort of image of that, your idea taken really to an extreme position would be interesting.
Okay, great conversation. Thank you very much.